the civil society organization have a big role to play. And if we follow, look at the framework of transitional justice, we see that they have a lot to offer. Working with organizations in Africa and also in Latin America, I've seen how youth were trained and told how they can hold their local, on the local council level, accountable, how they can have a role in participatory budgeting, and how they can have a role in the decentralization of governance. This was all missed and misunderstood in the role of civil society in the country. And because in Egypt we had this whole smear campaign against civil society, there was a misconception for people of what are really their intentions. And if time allows, and let me give you an example how misunderstood the role of civil society. And this was a piece from what the prosecutor said as a conclusion on what civil society are doing. Civil society organization, they lured innocent people by conducting training courses on managing electoral campaigns. But in fact, they were making surveys and questionnaires over different sectors of society with the intention of making a certain degree of influence and break through the roots of our society, aiming at spreading chaos and disorder and destabilizing our social and economic, using the passion of innocent to achieve and rise the principle of democracy. So this is an accusation, actually. And this is why civil society in Egypt are restricted and are not able to really play the role they need to play in Egypt. I have to wrap up, but just I wanted to allude to yesterday's, if you attended the dinner, Mr. Mohammed Jamil was talking about the aspiration of having more microcredit projects in Egypt and providing employment opportunities. And the same with the Sawiris Foundation. And we can have all this, and we can have more funding, but without accountability mechanisms and without having civil society playing this role and using, holding those people in power accountable, there's no guarantee that the fruits of all these efforts will be delivered to the poor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you to all of our excellent speakers for what I thought were extremely hard-hitting, profound, thought-provoking presentations. We're now going to open up to question and answers. There are two microphones to my right and to my left here. Please, if you have a question, I would ask you to line up behind one of the microphones, and we'll take questions in groups of 2 or 3 questions at a time. And while you're lining up, let me take the first question that I'll put to anyone on the panel who would like to answer. And I was struck by this missing ingredient that seems to be missing not only in Egypt, but also given recent events in Syria, and you could argue Palestine and elsewhere on the region, that what actors in the region are missing isn't institutions. What's needed is not institution building, but actually consensus building. That this is the one thing that, and it's not only the Islamists, but other groups in Egypt seem to not do very well, and that is to find a way to share the same political, social sphere and space. Is that actually an issue? How relevant is that? Is that a role for civil society to be that venue, to be that forum, to be that space where these different actors can come to terms with one another? It seems, as Nathan Brown pointed out, it's much easier for these political groups to come to terms with the structures of the state than it is to come to terms with one another. In society. So I'm wondering if you might comment on this idea of consensus building. How do you go about doing this? Because it seems like, this debate on identity is now almost 2 years old, and it seems that we ought to be well beyond this, but is it? Is it an obstacle or is it a necessary hurdle that we need to get over in order to have this consensus? And then we'll take questions. If any of you want to answer.
Thank you very much, Khaled. Let me agree with what Nathan referred to, which is it's much easier for political actors, parties, movements, formal political actors, as well as informal political actors, to get to consensus-building mechanisms and measures if they are in institutions. So we had a brief period in which the People's Assembly did work with all difficulties which we encountered as parliamentarians belonging to the minority in the People's Assembly, the non-Islamist minority in the People's Assembly. We were in different endeavors close to build consensus, even with regard to the Constituent Assembly. 2 times we were close to build consensus, but we failed for different reasons. But definitely it's easier in institutions to build consensus. I doubt very much that we can go on talking about consensus-building measures and dynamics and strategies outside of formal institutions. Civil society plays a crucial role in Egypt in pushing forward the debate on different social, economic, and political issues pertaining to the process of political change we are going through. But can it serve as a forum for consensus building to an extent? I can attest to that with regard to key legislative initiatives which we had in the People's Assembly in the 6 months we worked. For example, the legislative initiative on a new law for civil society and for NGOs. Civil society played a crucial role in offering that venue, but in general, no, it comes down to institutions, primarily to parliaments, to build consensus and to enable political parties to negotiate and learn how to negotiate in real life. Otherwise, we will continue to be stuck in the identity debate, which unfortunately Islamist actors benefit from. And I'll get back maybe later on to Junior Brown's comment on does it reflect the true choice of Egyptians or not. So maybe we can get to that in the debate.
Anyone else want to? Nancy, go ahead.
Just a little comment is that we don't have any problem with identities and ideologies of people identifying that for themselves. I think the problem is the lack of skills or an ability on how to translate that into policy and how to use the skills to pressure policymakers into translate that into laws and legislations and being an effective operationalization tool. So, for example, at the time, as that Dr. Hamzawy mentioned, well, we were debating the new law for the NGOs. We found it very difficult to find members of civil society who have the ability and the skills to formulate a policy paper or a policy brief and know how to persuade members of parliaments with their view. So yes, some people have their views and identities, but translating and having that skill is missing and much needed in Egypt. So.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and go to the first question here. And please, I would ask you, please make sure it is in the form of a question. And please minimize the introductory part of the question as much as you can. And then we'll take another question afterward.
I'm Ibrahim Hussein with the Alliance of Egyptian Americans here in this country. My original question has been asked. You asked the question. Basically, how this group, the liberal progressive organization, are collaborating and working with each other. And from the response, I guess we can stand some improvement. But my other question to the panel, anything the Egyptian Americans in this country can do, what can we do to help in this movement toward moderation and democracy?
Good question. Excuse me, good question. And our next question to the left here.
Thank you. I'm George Dragnich, now retired, but I was an executive director of the International Labor Organization in Geneva at the time of the uprising and traveled to Cairo soon afterwards in response to the government's request that we help them redraft labor laws that would allow strikes and labor unions, and of course, as workers exercised what they thought would be rights coming their way, the government had second thoughts about doing away with the Mubarak circumscribing of the labor unions. But none of you have mentioned this as a mass movement that is inherently secular and, of course, crosses, therefore, sectarian lines, even though the strikes played a major role in the bringing down Mubarak. Professor Hamzawy, you did mention the absence of social and economic rights in the Constitution that's being drafted. Dr. O'Cal, of course, I'd be interested in your concept as well as the role of the labor movement in civic society. Thank you.
Question on the labor movement, and we'll take a third question, and then we'll give it to the panel.
Thank you. John Anderson, independent policy analyst. Also regarding particularly the Egyptian domestic legislative front and laws regarding political process and activity. What should be the role of the Egyptian society and political parties with regard to the controversy that, of course, is ongoing with regard to foreign financing of democracy and advocacy type activities in Egypt and or direct funding of political parties? It's an important question for a lot of reasons, but particularly given the fact that there continue to be flows, not only governmental but private, from Gulf and other sources that are important to political activity in Egypt. Clearly, what should be the position, let's say, of political forces in Egypt, and particularly civil society and advocacy organizations? Thank you.